Welcome to another episode of Litigious, a podcast dedicated to common sense discussion of legal stories in the news. This is take two. Take one went sideways when I was accused of having been frozen on camera, but we're back, and we're back this week talking about some news, legal stories in the news. Reminder that this podcast is brought to you by Durazio Peterson, a plaintiff's employment and personal injury law firm practicing in New York, Massachusetts, and Vermont. If you have questions about any of those things, please feel free to reach out to us at duraziopeterson.com or hit us up on the socials. If you have questions about this podcast or something you want to hear discussed, by all means, send us a message on Instagram. And if you are enjoying the podcast, please like, subscribe, and share with a friend as we continue our journey to become the number one legal podcast in the country, which seems inevitable at this point. Anyway, this week, we're starting off with our headlines of the week and talking about, I guess the theme for the first couple is going to be really enjoyed for a long time, who are now in some trouble. And we'll start that with Jay-Z. So Jay-Z's making news. Have you heard about this case? You've heard about this.
Yes, well, we talked about this on our prior podcast in the context of defamation. He is suing one of the P. Diddy accuser's attorneys for defamation.
Correct. So, just a little bit of backstory on this. Last year, Jay-Z was identified by a lawyer named Tony Buzbee out of Texas. He's a big, high-profile plaintiff's lawyer, and he likes to make splashy headlines. And Tony Buzbee sent a letter to Jay-Z's folks saying, basically, we believe that Jay-Z was involved in an alleged sexual assault of a 13-year-old along with P. Diddy. And if you don't settle this claim via mediation, we are going to file a public lawsuit against you. Jay-Z's people did not respond or did not respond favorably. And Buzbee then followed up on his threat and filed a lawsuit. Jay-Z then turned around and sued Buzbee for defamation, extortion, and intentional infliction of emotional distress based upon the letter, the threats, and the litigation. At some point along the way, Tony Buzbee's client dropped her claim and withdrew the lawsuit because there were some inconsistencies that came up during the course of the investigation, I guess. Jay-Z's suit basically alleged that Buzbee knew that the allegations were false when he sent the letter, and presumably then when he filed the lawsuit, and he sued him for those claims. A judge this week, struggling with a decision, ultimately dismissed Jay-Z's case, and essentially, the idea being that this type of thing is these types of statements from a lawyer are protected, and he made them in good faith, and the case, there was no basis for the suit. Now, there is a separate case that's still going in federal court in Alabama, but this is certainly for Tony Buzbee, and I'm sure Jay-Z's folks are not happy about it. They haven't been happy about it publicly, at least. So, what do you think about that?
My understanding is that the case that was dismissed was the extortion case, and potentially that the defamation may still be ongoing elsewhere. But I think what was significant about the extortion case is that it was based on this, basically a settlement letter from the attorney saying, if you agree to settle this case for some sort of financial amount, we won't move forward with a lawsuit. And I think what is the difficulty here is that that's very common. So it's a slippery slope to call something like that extortion, because lawyers send demand letters all the time on behalf of clients, because there is certainly a moment of opportunity and frankly leverage before you file a lawsuit, before things are public and before you're spending a ton of money to resolve a potential lawsuit. So to say that that's extortion, I'm not quite sure exactly what the standard is. Perhaps I'm sure there is a certain point where if you're sending letters like this with absolutely no basis in reality, based on a completely false accusation, perhaps there's a point where it crosses the line. But in the sort of abstract general sense, I think it would be probably a little bit dangerous to have a decision on the books that says it's extortion to send a settlement demand letter to a potential defendant. And it does sound like from the reporting on this that it was not an easy legal conclusion based on the law in California, and the judge even acknowledged that it would be potentially appealed and be further put to bed at a higher level.
Yeah, this happened. If you remember, we talked about it. I think Michael Avenatti, who's another lawyer who ended up going to jail, I believe, uh, sent a letter to Nike uh, demanding that they settle a claim, and they accused him of extortion as well, and it made big news, and they made a complaint to the bar. I mean, I will say, you know, we send demand letters all the time. I probably send multiple demand letters a week. It is not even remotely uncommon for lawyers to do that. Like you said, the idea being when we think a case has strong merit and is clear cut on liability and damages, the two things you have to prove if you file a lawsuit, we will often send a letter to either the wrongdoer, whether that's a company or it's typically a big company or an insurance company. And we will say, here's what we think you guys, your client or your insured did wrong. And we're going to give you an opportunity to settle this before we file a lawsuit. That happens all the time. So it's like you said, I mean, I think there's got to be a very serious concerns about the legitimacy of the claim for, this type of a case to fly. And I think it's a very dangerous precedent if they allowed this case to go forward from Jay-Z because, there is a presumption that, the attorney has taken some steps to confirm the veracity of the claims that they're filing. So I think this seems like it's the right decision dismissing it. Ultimately, Busby has to prove his client's case in court. So, if it's not if it's meritless, then he'll lose. In this case, he actually already withdrew it. So, but you do understand kind of both sides of this one because you understand how a celebrity would really take this personally because you can destroy somebody's character over a case that you haven't yet proven.
Yeah, and I think sometimes these more sort of celebrity type lawyers get themselves in trouble because perhaps they are threatening something beyond just moving forward with litigation. Maybe they're threatening the press and things like that. We don't do that when we send demand letters. We send them in cases that we've already vetted and already determined that we have a good faith basis to continue with a lawsuit. And we're not, taking a shot in the dark that some celebrity or somebody with deep pockets is just going to roll over and pay a bunch of money because we're threatening to humiliate them. So I think that, and obviously, so even on Jay-Z's side, they have a ton of resources to pursue these types of cases. Most of the time, regular people are not going to sue a lawyer for extortion or something like that and it's over a demand letter. But when you're dealing with these kinds of situations, it's different.
Yeah, and if you're in that situation, probably the best way to try to clear your name is to be incredibly aggressive in your response. And doing this is one way to, show, or at least attempt to show that you're innocent. Um, so, we'll keep an eye on these cases as they move forward, and continue to kind of report back on those. In the context of rappers or hip hop artists um, allegedly behaving badly, my former favorite hip hop artist turned horrible human being, Kanye West, now known as it was Ye, but I think he changed it again. Um, is back in the news this week because his former assistant filed an amended complaint in a lawsuit that she previously brought against him back in June of last year. So last year, she sued Kanye West for wrongful termination and sexual harassment. She this month filed what was a second amended complaint. And just for context here, when you file a lawsuit, you file a complaint. Uh, Typically, you have a period of time after doing that and after the other side responds to amend that complaint, to add things or remove things if you need to. And then as the case goes on, if new things come to light that you feel need to be alleged, you can file papers or an application with a court to amend it again. So that's what happened here, apparently. And in this case, the amended complaint alleges, this is a quote, oral rape without consent, and also that West coerced her into complying with his sexual demands by promising advancement in her career. And then it goes on to, and this sounds familiar, allege that he asked her to engage in uh, all sorts of different sexual escapades, including offering someone the opportunity to have sex with her in exchange for allowing Kanye to have sex with that person's significant other. She alleges after she refused this, he fired her. So and then there's another part of it that we'll talk about, which is that she says after she was gone, uh, he began making false complaints against her and swatting. You probably heard this term. It's somewhat familiar to me, but I haven't
Yeah,
seen it.
swatting is when it's this thing that is now one of the modern day bizarre issues that we didn't experience when we were growing up, where I believe it's that people make false police reports and then all of a sudden the police show up at your house, guns blazing. It actually happened to the girl who was accused of having an affair with her boyfriend's father. That Pat McAfee story we talked about, that happened. People showed up at either her mother's house or her grandmother's house. So it's just another modern day, unfortunate sort of somewhat online harassment that is a new thing, but it typically involves something like that, like law enforcement. I think we see it. I feel like it happened even at our kids' school. It's like when people make false bomb threats or false, school shooter threats and things like that, they could be almost like a robocall and, you know,
Yeah, and so
a new
she
way to
alleges that.
harass people.
Yeah, so she alleges that this has been going on, and she never knows when the police are going to show up to her house and all this kind of stuff. So this is an interesting one because it combines sort of some of the salacious allegations of like the claims against Diddy with the very sort of straightforward, you harassed me at work, and when I didn't comply, you fired me. And so she's now, you know, there are sort of two elements of damages here, right? And the employment piece of it, I don't know if she's got another job yet, but that would also entitle her, if she proves it, to lost wages and those kind of damages.
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting example of, I think we're starting to see more as, even though Diddy was acquitted of more of the sex trafficking allegations in his trial, I think we are going to see as time goes by an evolution of these types of, I think the correct term would be coercive control, sort of sexual assault claims where people are in this imbalance of power and they are coerced into these sexual situations, and the question is going to be, was there consent or not? And I think people are starting to, obviously in the Diddy trial, I think maybe we're not there yet, where people genuinely are understanding sort of when someone really doesn't have the power to consent or not. But this, I think, relates to that a little bit. Very, I think the similar vein to that would be maybe more common in a workplace scenario is the quid pro quo sexual harassment that has been a common theme on the podcast lately, because I think Alex Cooper's allegations against her coach fall within that. The Tyler Perry situation falls within that. And this is another example of somebody accusing a powerful person of dangling career advancement over their heads in exchange for submitting to their sort of sexual overtures. So I think as our collective sort of societal understanding of this continues evolving, we might see more people pursuing legal claims based on that type of behavior.
Yeah, I agree. It sort of feels like obviously the Weinstein case kind of opened the floodgates to a lot of this. And, those cases, Weinstein and Matt Lauer, it was all kind of kicked off Me Too. And then there was kind of like a lull the last couple of years. And I feel like it's kind of the wave is kind of rising again. And you're seeing more people feel comfortable to come out against, like you said, these sort of in these unequal power dynamic relationships, making complaints that, look, this kind of thing has probably gone on forever. They're just people weren't comfortable bringing it out, and so um, it's interesting to see, someone who was in this sort of position with a person in that kind of power feel comfortable enough to come out. Now, Kanye West is a different example than even Tyler Perry because Tyler Perry is someone who's pretty well respected, I think. Um, versus Kanye, who, people read this and they're like, well, that sounds about right. This guy seems like he's a complete lunatic. So, again, interesting case. All these folks are denying it. I mean, I want to be very clear about that. He says this is nonsense, just like Jay-Z did, just like Tyler Perry has, just like Diddy has. So, the facts will have to play out as to whether or not people believe the story. But it's like you said, I think we've seen an increase in this, and I don't think it's going away anytime soon. Anything else on that?
No.
Uh, Another one we'll touch on quickly, because we just saw the movie F1 with our kids this week. And by the way, the movie was great, I thought. And Brad Pitt, despite his like public turmoil with his former wife and family, continues to be put out the hits. I was just watching Once Upon a Time in Hollywood or I've been trying to watch it with my son, and it's one of my favorite movies. And he just keeps putting them out. So, but that after seeing the movie, this popped up, and I thought we could talk about it, which is there's obviously this long running lawsuit between Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie, relating to their divorce after years of marriage. And currently, they're in a long running legal battle over ownership of a French winery that they had together. At one point, Jolie sold her half of the winery to a group, and Pitt has filed a lawsuit arising out of that sale. Um, I think essentially claiming that the sale was malicious, and that he wanted to buy it from her and that he had some right to. The problem is that he is trying to get information from one of the employees of the group that purchased half of the vineyard from Jolie, but that person lives in Switzerland. And he's been trying to take this person's deposition. But as we know, when you try to take someone's deposition outside of your own state, let alone outside of the country, it's extremely difficult. And you typically don't have any jurisdiction to serve a subpoena, again, out of state or more specifically out of the country. It's very challenging to do that. In New York, at least, if you want to subpoena a witness for a deposition, you simply have a process server send them the subpoena if you're already in litigation and they have to show up. Not so for somebody who's in another country. And now Pitt's team has filed a motion to get copies of text messages between Jolie and this individual, because they claim that these text messages will indicate malice on her part. So that's where that case is. We haven't talked about this before, but I thought that was an interesting legal issue and something that we kind of see in the discovery process. Any thoughts on that one?
Just a couple of things. I think it just is another example of people being aware of the availability and ability to retrieve people's text messages in the context of litigation. I think that's something that, even though he is clearly struggling because of the, jurisdictional issues here, if they were all in the same place, this probably wouldn't be much of an issue. And he, I would think, would be likely to be able to receive those text messages directly from Angelina Jolie anyway, which is could be how this would shake out, because sometimes I don't know if I think this entity is a party to the lawsuit, but if you're trying to get something from a non-party, sometimes the court will say, well, if you could get it from a party, then we're going to leave this other person alone. But I think it just, in this day and age, clearly they think that some sort of business was conducted over text message. I don't know that that's really a great idea in general, even though probably everyone is guilty of it. And, perhaps they would just ask for the emails anyway. But I do think it's just a caution of, how you're using your email or not, or your text messages or not. And then, there's so much more to this situation with Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie. I think as a woman is sort of demoralizing, because there's so few men out there, sadly, who are untainted by accusations of abuse. And I think the sort of side note to this is that there were some relatively serious allegations against him, of physical, potentially emotional abuse. I think the context of it is that he was having, struggles with alcohol at the time. I don't know that that's an excuse, but this sort of, one of the reasons this issue with the winery is not only because of their divorce, but because her side of the story is that the reason why she ultimately did not sell him her share was because he was requesting that she sign an NDA in the context of the sale that didn't actually have to do with the sale of the winery, but had to do with their personal issues. And she was not willing to sign away her right to speak publicly about her experience with him or their children, outside of the context of their divorce proceedings, which is what I think he was looking for. And I have not perceived that she's out there trying to air their dirty laundry in any way, but I could absolutely see someone not being willing to silence themselves for the rest of their life, basically as leverage in a business deal. So from what I can gather, is she said, okay, I'll sell my share to somebody else. And I did read a big long article about this years ago that had nothing to do with the current thing, that sort of explained the whole story of this vineyard, which I think makes either it's like a rosé or a sparkling rosé or something, but it's apparently very successful and very valuable. And I guess from Brad Pitt's perspective, had a deep personal meaning to him, which is why he has not walked away from this.
Yeah, it's Miraval, I think, which is like a big rosé producer.
Yeah, and it's Stoli is who they sold it. She sold it to their wine
Yeah.
section.
Yeah, the only thing I'll piggyback on what you said, which is, we see confidentiality agreements come up in settlements routinely, and most of the time it's fine because it's just related to discussion of whatever the amount of the settlement is. And in most cases, it's in the client's interest if presented with it to, we think, and we've talked about this before, that it makes sense in a lot of cases to just put it behind you. But in this situation where, it's such a public topic, I could see being hesitant to sign that away as well, if nothing else, but for the fact that if you get asked about it and you make a passive comment, are you then going to get sued for violating the agreement, which you could totally foresee happening. So it
Right,
makes
especially in that situation that it's so personal. I mean, where do you draw the line? It's easier in our cases with your employer, just don't talk about these people again publicly. They're usually, like you said, I think it's for the best for people to turn the page and continue, and you don't need to go around trashing somebody, just like how you don't want them to go around trashing you, and we make that type of thing mutual. But yeah, for a public figure like that to not be able to speak about your own life and your own family and your own experience, I think is probably not a reasonable request in the context of a separation of a business partnership. That just doesn't feel, it seems to me that that would be something that might be unreasonable in that situation, and understandable that you might say, if that's a condition that you're a hill that you're willing to die on, then I'm not going to agree to that.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Next up, we've got a couple updates on the Lively Baldoni case that just keeps on coming. And I'm going to put this first one under headlines because I read it a couple of days ago, which is that Blake Lively was granted a quote unquote protective order ahead of depositions, which are scheduled actually for today. Now, the protective order, and I use that term loosely, is that her team had to make arrangements for his team to have a computer and the ability to print and copy documents in a space that she chooses during the deposition. His team had to notify her about who would attend the deposition, and the deposition had to be held at a remote location. So these are three things that are, well, two out of three of these are very routine. I have depositions all the time. I had one this week. I have three next week. And so it's kind of funny when you read about this as something that's newsworthy, because during depositions, it is perfectly normal to be able to have a computer with you and print off documents or make copies of documents that are marked as exhibits. That happens every time. It is perfectly normal to know who is going to attend a deposition. In New York, the people who are permitted to attend a deposition are the parties to the deposition, any witness who is not a party, and the lawyers. And so that's not even remotely unusual. And the other is that it has to be held at a redacted location, which makes perfect sense given the paparazzi. So this is sort of a funny headline of a protective order having been granted when it's, for the most part, these are things that are very common in depositions. Any thoughts about that?
And I think a lot of what is getting reported in this case is it's obviously been very newsworthy and they've been reporting on every little thing. Like you said, most of it is kind of meaningless when it comes to litigation, very routine things. But I think the court of public opinion seems to still be sort of against her, even though she had this big win where Justin Baldoni's lawsuit against her was dismissed. And as a side note, just in terms of updating, he has decided not to refile any of the claims that he was permitted to. So most of his lawsuit was dismissed. A couple of the claims he was allowed to resubmit in an amended complaint and has apparently elected not to do that. So that was a significant win for her. I still see her getting almost nonstop bad press, which I guess is something that she's claiming it potentially. This was reported again, sort of in a way that I think was trying to frame it like Blake Lively filed a lawsuit and now she doesn't really want to deal with the consequences of the lawsuit, like having to give your deposition and this and that. But in her defense, the lawyer for Baldoni, who's one of these over the top guys, was saying we're going to have the deposition in Madison Square Garden and we're going to sell tickets and the proceeds from the tickets we're going to donate to domestic violence victims. I mean, as somebody who like is involved in domestic violence organizations, I find that just like offensive that he's even talking like that. Like, I don't know. I still, this may all go against her in the long run, but I still, the woman in me and with what we do for a living still is very put off by some of the ways that they've defended themselves in this case. And that's why she's asking for a protective order, because when you're acting be outside the bounds of what is normal, then people have to go to the judge. And I'm sure the judge is not excited to have to make a ruling on what should be routine, easy issues every 5 minutes. But that's what happens when, you try to be over the top.
Yeah, that's a good point. And you know, we I actually just recorded a video for our YouTube page, and the entire part of my video was talking about how depositions are actually very boring. And that's actually typically a strategy from the other side is they try to lull you into feeling tired and fatigued to be able to just get whatever they want from you during a deposition. This lawyer is taking the sort of exact opposite approach. And I've dealt with lawyers like this, you probably have too, where everything is difficult and they make a show out of everything and they're wildly over the top. And I think it's frankly, I personally think it's ineffective because it doesn't necessarily move the needle. If anything, it makes you want to dig in more on your positions, and you sort of find yourself, it's very hard not to lower yourself to their level, even though you're trying to rise above it and just stay professional. Yeah, I get what you're saying. It does make sense that in this case, they would have to have a protective order. Uh, the redacted location makes sense in light of his comments about Madison Square Garden. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
Yeah. And just
Um,
the paparazzi too. I think you said that before. I mean, you typically, what I also think is interesting is, and this is maybe also happening because of the personalities that are involved, but we don't publicly file deposition notices and things like that. I mean, unless I guess if the court had to order it. So I think one of their defense tactics is to make this as public and as invasive as possible by potentially making things public that would not ordinarily be made public in the first place. So yeah, I mean, if you're going to file documents, or if you need the judge to give you some kind of protective order or gag order almost in this situation, to not go blab to the whole universe, Blake Lively is showing up at such and such office on such and such a date and time, then I don't see that that scores you any points with the judge. And considering the fact that his entire case was dismissed, then it might not be a great strategy, even though they are entitled to now aggressively defend her claims. But I think, the only other update I think on Blake Lively that I was seeing in the news, but every article that I saw was not really able to confirm whether these were legit or not. But apparently a bunch of social media influencers have started receiving subpoenas for, I don't know, like from Google, or just various different subpoenas that are being framed as Blake Lively sort of trying to get to the bottom of whether anybody was hired by Baldoni to give her some bad press. But it's been hard to sort of figure out which of these are legit and which aren't. Apparently, I know Perez Hilton, who is still around. I sort of like, I think he's had a resurgence because of this Blake Lively thing, because for me, that's somebody kind of from our youth. But he apparently has really done a deep dive into this, as has Candace Owens, who I guess has like pivoted a little bit from being a conservative commentator and has also sort of gone all in on this. Both of them anti Blake Lively in their reporting. But that was all over the news recently, that they had received these subpoenas, but neither one of them confirmed that they had actually received it. They just said, I've been told I'm getting this subpoena, or blah, blah, blah. So it's a little hard to tell if this has actually happened or not. But I think that's another thing where a court will step in if it's sort of an unfounded fishing expedition. Typically, if you're going around serving non-party subpoenas, you should have some basis in reality for that.
Look, I give this guy credit for, if nothing else, he has turned like the nuance and boring minutia of a lawsuit into a public headline all along the way. So he's certainly getting himself in the news a lot, if that's the goal. But your comment brings me to the next story associated with this case, which is the misleading headline of the week. Because in December, Blake Lively filed a federal lawsuit against, quote, social media guru Jed Wallace. I don't know who that is. Alleging that he ran an untraceable smear campaign online against her. And this week, the headlines were that the judge dismissed the case and that he won the lawsuit. Okay. I read 2 or 3 articles about this, and it turns out that all the judge did was say, it was a judge in New York, and said, yes, the case is dismissed, not because of anything to do with the merits, but because it was based upon essentially lack of personal jurisdiction, which means the court did not feel that enough of the events happened in New York to give a New York court jurisdiction to hear the case. So this was spun by Jed Wallace, his people, the social media crowd, the anti-Blake Lively crowd, as she's had yet another loss. She can't prove it. But the reality is that this case was just not properly sued in the right place, apparently. So the judge ruled that this person cannot be forced to defend the case in New York. I think we talked about this before, and this was part of that New York Times article which kind of prompted all of this, which is that there was like this sort of like shadow operation behind the scenes, allegedly, to smear her through social media, which I mean was somewhat effective, I think.
Yeah, this is one of those boring procedural issues that got reported like it was a big deal. As you said, personal jurisdiction is basically the foundation issue in any lawsuit. Can you be sued in this state? And the standard is, what have you done in this state? And so that really was what that was all about. And she can refile it in the appropriate jurisdiction. So that's a little bit much ado about nothing.
Yeah, that's why it's a misleading headline. Um, so okay, last new topic coming in this week, which is our non sequitur of the week, and this one just popped up today. If you haven't opened social media today, as of the airing of this podcast, you will see that everywhere you look, there is a photo from a Coldplay concert that happened last night, which was
And
what,
video.
in video, which was July 16th at Gillette Stadium. And Coldplay ran their Kiss Cam, and the Kiss Cam flashed to a couple embracing, and it turned out that well, why don't you fill the rest in?
So there's a couple on the kiss cam, and the guy he's behind this woman, he's embracing her. And the second the camera hits them and they realize they're on, they hit the deck. She is like this, he is literally on the ground. Like, I don't even know, he disappeared. And Chris Martin goes, these people are either really shy or they're having an affair. Uh, Turns out that the internet sleuths of the world figured out that the man is allegedly the CEO of Astronomer, which I've never heard of, but apparently is a billion-dollar corporation. And the woman is the chief people officer of the company. Um, and they are both married to other people. So this has completely exploded. I mean, obviously it's serious and horrible for their spouses. That being said, the internet content on this is like every once in a while, the internet really comes out and like rises to the occasion of comedy. And that's what's happening here. Yeah, so and then there's like this other woman in the video who's sort of off to the side and she's kind of like covering her face and laughing while this is happening. And then there's like a whole other segment of these memes that have to do with like her being privy to all the sordid details of this situation. But in the very sort of, I think you introduced, this is our new little segment, non sequitur, that we will pick out some random thing, but try to tangentially related to the law and what we do for a living. And, you know, obviously these two people work together. So that just adds another layer of complexity and drama onto the whole thing. So a lot of companies, and especially this one, if it's a billion-dollar company, I would be shocked if they did not have a fraternization policy, or anti-fraternization policy, which is something that employers use to prevent a fiasco arising from people having an affair in the workplace. Most of the time, the purpose of them is to prevent and prohibit relationships between people who, going back to a common theme, have an unequal power within the company. So prohibiting relationships between someone in management or in a supervisory position with one of their subordinates would be the most obvious situation. He is the CEO of the company, so I suppose anyone in the company is theoretically his subordinate, although she is also in a management position. So this could potentially add another layer of drama onto this situation other than them having to face the music from their own spouses today, because this is super humiliating. And I don't know if people were like ready to move on from the Epstein files or like all of the other craziness that's happening right now, but it seemed that the internet was like prime to have some skating for it over something today. And this is like on every account that I follow was doing something about this today.
Yeah, this is like a classic internet moment. This will be everywhere for 24 to 48 hours, and then no one will ever think about it again, except for this guy and this lady or this woman and their spouses and families and the board of this company, who's probably thinking, you know, no one knew of this company but who was not involved with it until today. So, but it's like you said, I mean, no one is at the same level in a company as the CEO. So, that is an unequal power dynamic to some degree. The chief people person should know, certainly know better than that. Their primary
Right.
job is making sure that this kind of thing doesn't happen. Uh,
Right, exactly. Like chief people person for, I mean, I'm sure probably everyone knows this. I don't, you know this about me. I personally hate corporate speak, but chief people person is like the fancy, like big company version of
HR.
HR. Um, so yeah, exactly. That is the one person who typically should know better. And who knows? We don't know the full details of this. Maybe both of them are, on the way to divorce or already separated or whatnot. But the working together thing is still always a little sticky. And the big problem is, if one person wants to end the relationship and the other one doesn't, it's going to be very hard to fire the person who, is the subordinate in a situation where there's been a romantic relationship, because then we go back to, our common theme of quid pro quo and all of that.
Yep, that is exactly right. Well, I don't think we'll ever talk about this one again because I suspect it'll die as quickly as it flamed up. But
Oh, I'm obsessed with that. I'm gonna needing to do like I want to know every detail of if this guy's wife files for divorce, I'm gonna be reading those papers and reporting
all right,
back.
well, you can keep us updated next time or next whenever this comes up again. All right, anything else this week?
No?
All right. All right. Well, thank you for listening. Again, if you like the podcast, please like, subscribe, share with a friend. We will be back again probably next week with another episode talking about legal stories in the news. And if you have questions, as always, feel free to reach out to us on Instagram. Thanks again for listening.